Hey guys, today I want to talk to you about wages again. I did a video a few days ago about what a good starting wage is, and it brought up a lot of interesting questions and commentary, and out of that commentary I was inspired to make this video. So today I want to break down what my starting wage was when I started my business. And I'm doing this because there's a lot of people out there who are obsessed with this idea of the living wage, and they think minimum wage should keep getting raised. But I want to show you that whether you think a wage should be a certain thing, whether you have an opinion of how much that wage should be, the fact of the matter is you can't manage people's wages, because every single entrepreneur who starts a business is making less than minimum wage. And I want to demonstrate to you how, when I started, I was making a fraction of even minimum wage at best. So let's jump into it. I'm going to explain the first 3 years of my farming career in detail. We're going to look at the gross and net income, what I took home, and what was my hourly wage. And the whole point of this is to illustrate that if you only think about dollars and cents for your time, you're missing the big picture. And it's also to demonstrate that you can go on forever about how a living wage is important and how we need to raise minimum wage, and you can lobby the government to do that, but it still is not going to stop people from making below minimum wage. It can't be done. And I'll get to that in a minute. So let's go to my first year of farming. My first year of farming was a grind. I did so many things wrong. I obviously did some things right. That's why I'm here today. It's why I still do this, why I wrote a book about it. But I made a lot of mistakes. And you know, there's a saying that every entrepreneur makes 10 mistakes for every success that they had. So you don't, when you see a person like a famous entrepreneur like Richard Branson or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, and they're talking about how great they are and what they're doing, you only see them at their success. You don't see the whole lineage of all the mistakes that they made. So needless to say, I made a ton of mistakes in my first year, but I still was able to squeak out a small profit. I did $22,000 in gross sales, and that worked out to be about a $15,000 net. So my business has been a sole proprietorship, my farm. And so that net was my salary. That net was my take home. I only spent about $7,000 in my first year to get the basics of the things that I needed, like a rototiller, a small walk-in cooler. I put more time up front to save money. And so it's always a switch of you're either trading financial capital for maybe social capital or your time. There's all different ways of trading it. Sometimes I think, if I were to do it again, I would just have put more money in up front to get the things that I needed. But I didn't have all the experience and knowledge that I did, so it was kind of inevitable that I had to grind it out. Point is, like the nitty-gritty is, I had 40 weeks in my first year where I spent about 100 hours a week, sometimes like many more hours. Like there was many times in my first year of farming that I was working 7 days a week, 16 hours a day, sometimes even more. So 115, 120 hours a week, whatever that would be, to get where I did. So at the end of it, at a $15,000 net, I had 4,000 hours that I put in. That leaves me with $3.75 an hour for my time. So is that fair? Is it fair that somebody should be out making that kind of money while putting up all the risks, start a business, creating a place of work for somebody else? In my second year, I started to employ somebody. I'll get to that in a minute. Is it fair? And I would say, yeah, it's fair, but it's not. That's not the point. The point is, it's the reality. Whether you think it's fair or not is almost pointless, because it's just the reality. If you work for a company, if you work for a farm, a tech company, or whatever, chances are whoever started that business grinded for a number of years to get to the point where they could create value for others. So that means they took all that sacrifice to their time, their family, their personal health, to get to a point where they could employ somebody, and then you could demand $15 an hour as a living wage. So my second year, I did $55,000 of gross. The net worked out to be about $30K. So that was my salary. Now, in that second year, I started to grow more weeks of the season. I still wasn't year round at that point, but I was pushing the season harder. So I worked about 5,000 hours in that season, 100 hours an hour on average over 50 weeks. So at this point, now I'm making about $6 an hour. So 30K divided by 5,000, $6 an hour. So I'm still not making minimum wage. Is that fair? Doesn't matter. It's what had to be done to get to where I am now. Now, my third year, I started to make a bit more money. The farm made $78,000. The net was around 50K, so that was my salary. I started to employ people. Actually, I had a part-time person help me in my second year. And then in my third year, I had help that was full-time. So I was paying that person for 30 to 40 hours a week, and it was, I didn't write it down in my notes here, but they were basically making more than me. I think it was $12 to $15 an hour they were getting paid. At the end of it, for me putting in 100 hours a week for 50 weeks, 5,000 hours, I was making $10 an hour. So I don't even think, that was in 2012, I don't even think the minimum wage was $10. It might have been $10.50. So I'm still making less than minimum wage. Is that fair? Should I have been getting paid more? Should I have had a government subsidy to make sure that I was getting a living wage? Doesn't matter. Whether you think it's fair or not is irrelevant. The fact is, that's what I had to do to get the job done. That's what I had to do to get my farm to where it is today. Now, in my fourth and fifth year, things started to change. In my fourth year of my farming career, I went into a partnership. And the farm overall almost doubled the gross revenue of the farm in the previous year. However, the net was, because it was split between two parties, I ended up making less than I did in my third year, and I worked just as many hours. So there was no growth in that year, except I learned some valuable lessons. I learned about partnerships and how risky they are. I also learned about how managing people, how you have to manage people and find the right people. And needless to say, it was a hard lesson that fourth year, but in my fifth year, I really hit it. I really hit a home run, if you will, because what I did is I basically eliminated like all the overhead. I went back down to farming myself, and I had one part-time helper, and I put in less hours than I did my fourth year. I worked about on average 40 hours a week, and I made a pretty good living. Like we made, I think it was 70, my net was 50 or somewhere around there. Needless to say, at this point I was making like $15 an hour or something because I was putting in way less time. My take home in my fifth year was the same as it was in my third year, but I worked way less hours because I increased efficiencies, I cut costs, I cut all the crops that weren't really making a lot of money. I eliminated so much of my overhead. I went from having 4 or 5 people work for me to having half, having a person that was part-time. Basically, I did all the field work. I had a person helping me do the harvesting and the prepping. And then from there, I was at a point where I was grounded and I could grow the business because I knew what the game was and I knew how to move forward without increasing my costs. And that has been the recipe for my success. That was the blueprint of the book that I wrote, The Urban Farmer. If you don't have a copy, click the link down below, discount code there for you. You can buy it from my website. So that was the blueprint, and then it grew from there. So the thing is that's important to understand with all of this, and what the point I'm trying to convey here is that you're not entitled to anything. And if you do think you're entitled to something, somebody else had to do the work anyway. So if you show up at a job and you think you're entitled to $15 an hour as a starting wage, well, chances are that the person who started that business for a period of time was making less than minimum wage. So you're asking to be paid more than they were just for showing up. So is that fair? I don't know. I don't know if it's fair. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The point is, it's irrelevant because there was somebody else there to lay the groundwork for you to show up and make $15 an hour. Somebody laid the groundwork and they made a fraction of that, even less, sometimes even negative. Most businesses don't make any money in their first couple of years, and a lot of those businesses go into debt in their first year. So if you think $0 an hour isn't fair, how about negative $3 an hour for a couple of years? That's what's required to start a business. It's the reality of it. Some of you may have heard this theory about the 10,000 hours. If you put 10,000 hours into something, you can become a master of it. And this is the advantage that entrepreneurs or people who are willing to sacrifice a low wage for time. This is the advantage they have, is that by putting in that time, they become masters of something. This is why I convey to young people the importance of not worrying about a wage when you're starting out. If you're living with your parents, or you're living in a big house with a bunch of people, when you're young, essentially, your overhead is low. You know, I have a family now, I have a mortgage, I have all kinds of things that I'm responsible for every day. And that means that I don't have the ability to move from one thing to the next. You know, being poor, or, you know, living under the poverty line, is like every student or young person is in North America. I lived under the poverty line for like 10 years. That's actually a huge advantage because you have no overhead. You have very little overhead. You can move from one thing to the next without having to worry about your kids starving, or losing your home, or losing your livelihood. So there's actually an advantage to starting that way. And this is why I tell young people, don't worry about the wage up front. Work to learn, not work to earn. That attitude is going to gain you hours, and it's going to gain you experience. And many of you have seen that video I did on the 8 forms of capital. If not, you should check it out, because that's a thing that a lot of people are missing when we're talking about a starting wage or a wage in general. People are only thinking about dollars and cents. And everybody knows that there's more to life and the world than dollars and cents. Like, I can't believe that we have to spell this out, but we do. And it's important to understand that, because experience, social capital, relationships with people, knowledge, all these things have intrinsic value that, in my opinion, is more valuable than dollars and cents. So you will gain those things if you're not so obsessed with your dollar an hour wage, because no employer or entrepreneur who started a business is sitting there in the first couple months of getting their business started and calculating their dollar an hour wage. If you did, you would be depressed and you would probably want to throw in the towel. You have to grind it out. You have to hustle in order to get to that point. So that's the point that I'm trying to make here, guys, is that no matter what you think is a fair starting wage or what the living wage should be, entrepreneurs and people who have started businesses have grinded at a fraction of those wages to make a business that you can work for. So be thankful, be appreciative that that exists for you. And the amount of opportunity that exists in the world today is unbelievable. All you got to do is apply yourself. All you got to do is work a little bit harder than everybody else, and you can get to a point where maybe you're standing here giving advice to people starting businesses as well. So hope you guys have found it helpful. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more stuff like this. Like and share the videos with your friends, and check out my book, The Urban Farmer, if you haven't read it already, and I'll talk to you later.